What happens when a neighborhood built on quiet luxury suddenly becomes the stage for a drama fit for Hollywood and royalty? Picture this: manicured lawns, perfectly trimmed hedges, and the calm hum of Montecito life. Now imagine that calm shattered by rumors of drones hovering above your property, whispers of intimidation, and one neighbor everyone is watching: Meghan Markle. She's arrived with Prince Harry, the world's most scrutinized couple, and suddenly the peaceful coastal enclave is anything but serene. But what really happened behind the gates? That's the question we're here to answer, and the story is stranger than anyone could have imagined. When Meghan and Harry purchased their Montecito estate, there was excitement. The media called it a dream home, sun-drenched, private, a sanctuary for two of the most famous people on the planet. Locals, however, weren't all cheering. Hollywood veterans like Rob Lowe had been enjoying the community for decades, and now their peaceful enclave was suddenly on high alert. Neighbors were whispering about helicopters, mysterious visitors, and yes, drones. Little did they know that these small mechanical eyes in the sky would become a central symbol of tension, a lightning rod for gossip, and a narrative that would grip the nation. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Rob Lowe, who has lived in Montecito for years, is known for his charm and affability. But even he couldn't mask the shock and concern he reportedly felt when drone sightings escalated near his property. Some neighbors claimed the drones were harmless, just hobbyist gadgets, or even part of a legitimate security system. Others weren't so sure. It felt invasive, one resident allegedly said, like someone was watching us, silently, from the sky. And when these incidents were combined with stories of alleged bullying and boundary issues, Montecito suddenly transformed from a sun-soaked haven into a simmering pressure cooker of intrigue. Consider this: in a neighborhood where everyone knows each other, or at least pretends to, the arrival of high-profile royals was bound to stir the pot. But what escalated matters was not just fame. It was perceived entitlement, clashes over privacy, and the collision of Hollywood culture with royal protocol. Imagine sitting on your veranda, coffee in hand, when a drone whirs overhead. You might initially think, oh, it's just someone flying a new toy. But when this happens repeatedly, when you see unfamiliar figures near your property, when even Rob Lowe expresses alarm, suddenly it's not a toy. Suddenly, it's a matter of principle, pride, and community cohesion. And what happens when those principles collide with international celebrity? That's where things get complicated and juicy. Let's rewind a little. Meghan Markle wasn't just any newcomer. She was a global figure whose every action had been dissected by the media for years. Her move to Montecito wasn't just a real estate transaction. It was a statement, a retreat, a sanctuary, a bold declaration of independence from palace life. Prince Harry, too, was seeking privacy after years of intense scrutiny. But privacy in Montecito is a complicated thing. The area is idyllic, yes, but it's also packed with wealthy, influential people, all protective of their personal space and reputation. And in a place where the value of privacy is almost sacred, rumors of drones, surveillance, and neighborly friction take on outsized significance. The drama escalates further when reports surface that Meghan's presence had allegedly created tension beyond casual neighborly disputes. Stories emerged, some confirmed, some rumor, about her interactions with the community that neighbors described as confrontational or controlling. Certain behaviors, when filtered through the lens of celebrity culture and royal expectations, can appear amplified, even threatening. Whether intentional or misunderstood, the result was the same. Montecito was on edge, and when Rob Lowe publicly commented on these events, the story leapt from private gossip to international headlines. Now, let's examine the drones. This is where the story gets cinematic. Drones are small, but they carry massive symbolic weight. They represent intrusion, curiosity, and sometimes a subtle kind of surveillance. Some claim the drones were operated for harmless purposes, filming scenery, checking property lines, or simple hobbyist experiments. Others allege they were tools of intimidation, evidence of bullying, or even proof of a more calculated effort to monitor neighbors. What's striking is how quickly a simple technology became the focal point for larger fears. It was no longer about who owned the drone or what it captured. It became a question of trust, boundaries, and whether one of the world's most famous women could coexist in a small, tight-knit community without friction. Rob Lowe's account added layers of complexity. In interviews, he implied that Meghan's behavior, combined with these drone incidents, contributed to a sense of discomfort in Montecito. He reportedly claimed that neighbors felt pressured, watched, or even threatened. This wasn't just petty gossip. These are serious allegations about the dynamics of power, influence, and social hierarchy in an ultra-wealthy enclave. And when someone like Rob Lowe, a respected actor with decades in Hollywood, lends credibility to the narrative, it's hard to dismiss the concerns as mere rumor. The community's reaction was one of tension, secrecy, and quiet maneuvering. Everyone had opinions, everyone had theories, and yet no one wanted to speak publicly. For fear of confrontation, for fear of media scrutiny, for fear of escalating what was already a delicate situation. Yet despite these tensions, Meghan and Harry continued to make headlines, not only for the drone saga, but for their larger narrative, leaving royal duties, establishing new foundations, and redefining what it means to be a modern royal couple. And here's the kicker. While the public focused on their global initiatives, the real-life drama was unfolding quietly behind the hedges of Montecito. It's a classic case of appearances versus reality. To outsiders, this was a story about royalty and Hollywood glitz. To insiders, it was a story about drones, neighborhood etiquette, and boundaries that were tested in ways few could have imagined. The emotional undertone is fascinating. On one hand, there is admiration and fascination with Meghan Markle, a woman who navigates the worlds of fame, royalty, and media with skill. On the other, there is anxiety and resentment from neighbors who feel their privacy is being encroached upon. This tension is amplified by the presence of a third party, technology. Drones, small and mechanical, become the embodiment of unease, turning what could have been a simple social adjustment into a full-blown narrative of suspicion, fear, and intrigue. As we explore this story, it's crucial to understand the stakes. This isn't just a tale of celebrity neighbors. This is a case study in perception, in privacy, in the collision of vastly different cultures and expectations. It's a story about how even the most carefully curated public image can be disrupted by small, seemingly trivial events. And it's about what happens when ordinary people, albeit very wealthy ones, intersect with extraordinary public figures in ways that challenge comfort zones, social norms, and the boundaries of civility. So what really happened in Montecito? Did drones really fly overhead with sinister intent? Was Meghan Markle genuinely at odds with her neighbors, or were the rumors exaggerated by perception, fear, and media sensationalism? What role did Rob Lowe's statements play in amplifying the story? And most importantly, how did a community of carefully curated perfection transform into a microcosm of scandal, secrecy, and drama? These are the questions that drive our narrative, and they are just the beginning. By now, you might be wondering, how does a small coastal neighborhood become the stage for such a high-stakes drama? The answer lies in the interplay between celebrity, technology, and human emotion. In Montecito, nothing stays private for long. And when two of the world's most famous figures enter the picture, every action, every drone sighting, every whispered conversation, every rumor, takes on amplified meaning. This isn't simply gossip. This is a story about boundaries, influence, and the unintended consequences of fame. And as we'll see, the events in Montecito were about to reach a boiling point, a moment where even Hollywood's most polished veneer couldn't hide the underlying tension. Imagine moving to a place where the air smells like the ocean, the sun casts golden light over manicured lawns, and every street seems untouched by time. Montecito, California, is exactly that, a haven for celebrities, billionaires, and those seeking privacy that borders on sacred. For decades, this coastal enclave has been a sanctuary, a place where Hollywood stars like Rob Lowe, Oprah Winfrey, and Ellen DeGeneres could escape the public eye while still enjoying luxury at its peak. But in 2020, the community received a new neighbor, one who would change the dynamics of the town forever, Meghan Markle. From the moment Meghan and Prince Harry purchased their Montecito estate, the gossip engines were running at full throttle. This was not just a new neighbor moving in. This was a global phenomenon. Paparazzi circled the property before the couple even unpacked, media outlets speculated endlessly about the design of the home, and locals whispered behind hedges about what it meant for their quiet community. After all, Montecito is a place where discretion is currency, and suddenly the neighborhood had two of the world's most scrutinized individuals entering their midst. But Meghan's arrival was far from a silent or subtle affair. From the outset, the couple was highly visible, their movements noticed, their every visit logged. Residents noticed an increase in security measures, cameras, guards, and yes, drones, small, mechanical eyes that seemed to float over the landscape. To some, this was reassuring. For others, it was a clear signal. Life in Montecito would no longer be the serene retreat it had always been. Neighbors began noticing patterns. Early morning joggers would spot unidentified drones hovering near the estate. Gardeners and staff reported feeling observed, as though each step was being recorded. Rob Lowe, a man who has lived in the area for decades and who understands the delicate balance of celebrity and community, was reportedly unsettled. "We've lived here for years in peace," one anonymous neighbor said. "We never had to worry about being watched. Now it feels like we're living in a fishbowl." There were stories, some factual, some speculative, about interactions between Meghan and other community members. Some reported tense encounters over property lines or noise complaints. Others claimed she expressed strong opinions about how certain neighborhood issues should be handled, sometimes pushing back against long-standing community norms. This wasn't just a social adjustment, it was a cultural collision. Meghan came from a world where visibility and influence were part of her identity, while Montecito operated on discretion, quiet influence, and subtle negotiation. The difference created friction, and friction, as we know, can escalate quickly. But beyond the tension, there was also fascination. Residents couldn't help but be drawn to the allure of royalty. Invitations to charity events, whispers in private gatherings, and even casual conversations on walking trails all carried an undertone of excitement mixed with trepidation. Meghan and Harry represented not just celebrity, they represented the merging of Hollywood glamour with royal mystique. To be neighbors with them was an extraordinary social upgrade, yet also a potential minefield. The media, of course, didn't help. Every move Meghan and Harry made was documented, analyzed, and amplified. Social media channels buzzed with speculation about what life in Montecito would look like under their shadow. Did the couple interact with neighbors? Did they attend local events? Were there disputes behind closed gates? Each question fueled curiosity, and the narrative began to take on a life of its own, one that combined glamour, tension, and, ultimately, controversy. One of the first reported flashpoints involved the property's drones. Some suggested they were being used for security, others hinted at filming purposes, and still others whispered that they were a sign of something more insidious, surveillance of neighbors. In a community where privacy is paramount, even the hint of observation was enough to unsettle long-standing residents. Rob Lowe's accounts later emphasized this tension, highlighting how even a seemingly small intrusion could ripple outward, affecting the social fabric of Montecito. As Meghan and Harry settled in, the contrast between their lifestyle and that of their neighbors became increasingly apparent. The couple sought a balance between privacy and public engagement, creating a tension that was unavoidable in a town where celebrity status was already a norm. Locals were torn. On one hand, they were thrilled to have royalty next door, and on the other, they were wary of the attention and disruption that inevitably followed. The architecture of the estate itself became a symbol of the cultural clash. Hidden gates, extensive security, and luxurious landscaping were intended to create sanctuary, but to neighbors, these measures appeared imposing, even fortress-like. A place designed for privacy inadvertently sent a message. Boundaries were strict, and any intrusion, real or perceived, would be noticed. The arrival of drones only added to the sense of unease, making it clear that Montecito's dynamics were shifting. At the same time, Meghan's presence brought energy and visibility to the community. Charity events, philanthropic engagements, and local appearances began attracting attention. Residents who had long enjoyed a quiet existence now found themselves participating in conversations that were being dissected globally. The juxtaposition of local life with international scrutiny created a new kind of pressure. Every interaction carried potential significance. Yet, even as these tensions simmered, there were moments of charm and connection. Some neighbors recalled brief greetings, polite nods over fences, and small gestures that hinted at goodwill. But these moments were fleeting and often overshadowed by reports of disputes, drone sightings, and whispered warnings. The narrative being constructed, both by residents and by media coverage, was one of contrast: glamour versus secrecy, celebrity versus community norms, intrigue versus privacy. In many ways, Montecito became a microcosm of Meghan and Harry's broader challenges. Just as the couple had struggled to navigate the expectations of royalty while pursuing independence, they now faced the challenge of integrating into a community that valued tradition, discretion, and subtle negotiation. Their personal journey became intertwined with the community's social fabric, creating a dynamic that was both fascinating and volatile. Rob Lowe's perspective provides a lens through which this drama is magnified. As someone entrenched in the local culture and the broader world of Hollywood, he could perceive both sides: the allure and influence of celebrity, and the very real need for boundaries and respect. His claims, widely reported, added credibility to concerns that had previously existed only in whispers. According to reports, Lowe suggested that Meghan's interactions, combined with the drone sightings, contributed to a growing sense of discomfort among residents, an impression that the couple's presence was disruptive rather than harmonious. It's important to note that much of what unfolded is filtered through perception, media narratives, and anecdotal accounts. Yet the emotional truth is undeniable. The arrival of Meghan and Harry disrupted the status quo. Montecito, a community carefully curated for privacy and discretion, suddenly found itself under a lens. Neighbors were navigating a delicate balance between curiosity, admiration, and concern, and the stakes were high. Every gesture, every movement, every drone sighting became fodder for analysis, speculation, and anxiety. As the days and weeks passed, stories about neighborhood tensions began to coalesce. Complaints about noise, security, and drone activity surfaced. Rumors of confrontations circulated. Even subtle disagreements over property boundaries or community norms took on outsized significance, interpreted through the prism of celebrity and royalty. By the time Rob Lowe publicly commented on these matters, the narrative had already taken hold. Montecito was no longer just a quiet enclave. It was the setting for a drama involving power, influence, and intrigue. Yet the most surprising element of all was not the disruption itself, but how quickly it escalated from neighborhood concern to headline-making story. What started as curiosity and mild tension became a complex tapestry of suspicion, media scrutiny, and social anxiety. The drones, the interactions, the whispered rumors, they all combined into a narrative that was irresistible to both residents and the public. Montecito had become a stage, and every neighbor, every observer, was now part of the audience. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. As tensions simmered, the question on everyone's mind shifted: would Meghan and Harry adapt to the community, or would Montecito adapt to them? The answer, as events would soon reveal, was neither simple nor predictable. The drama was only beginning. What happened next would shock neighbors, challenge assumptions, and set the stage for allegations that would reverberate far beyond this picturesque California town. Living in Montecito is often described as a dream. Sprawling estates tucked into lush hillsides, ocean breezes carrying the scent of salt and flowers, and a level of privacy that even Hollywood stars find enviable. But beneath the serene picture lies a delicate ecosystem of influence, etiquette, and unspoken rules. Every neighbor knows that in a community like this, status and discretion go hand in hand. That balance, however, was about to be tested in ways few residents could have anticipated. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry arrived, the quiet order of Montecito collided with the weight of celebrity, royalty, and global scrutiny, and the results were immediate, palpable, and, in some cases, shocking. From the moment the royal couple moved in, neighbors began recalibrating their expectations. This was no ordinary addition to the neighborhood. Meghan and Harry weren't just celebrities. They were former royals, global icons, and personalities whose every action had been chronicled for decades. For the long-term residents, including Hollywood legends like Rob Lowe, the arrival of the couple wasn't merely an event, it was a disruption. Suddenly, their world of carefully maintained privacy, garden parties, and quiet social diplomacy had to accommodate international attention and the dynamics of royalty. Rob Lowe, in particular, became a focal point for many of the stories circulating around Montecito. He had spent decades in Hollywood, navigating fame and influence, but even he admitted the scenario was unusual. According to accounts, Lowe observed the neighborhood adjusting to new realities. Security measures were ramped up, drone sightings became more frequent, and interactions that had once been casual now carried undertones of caution. "We've lived here for years, and everyone knew the rhythms of the neighborhood," an anonymous source said. Then Meghan and Harry moved in, and suddenly it was like the rules had changed overnight. The arrival of the couple also ignited a fascinating social paradox. On one hand, neighbors were thrilled. After all, living next to royalty was an unparalleled status symbol. Invitations to casual gatherings now carried an extra allure, and even mundane conversations took on a layer of excitement. On the other hand, there was unease. Residents who were accustomed to privacy and discretion suddenly found themselves living in a hyper-visible environment. Every action, from jogging in the morning to walking a dog, could potentially attract notice, speculation, or intrusion. This tension between admiration and anxiety became a defining characteristic of Montecito life in the wake of Meghan and Harry's arrival. The drone incidents further complicated the social dynamics. While some residents viewed them as harmless, possibly security measures or hobbyist flights, others perceived them as intrusive. There were reports of neighbors feeling monitored, watched, or even subtly threatened. In a community where personal space and privacy are fiercely protected, the presence of drones created a pervasive sense of unease. Even small gestures, like looking out a window or strolling through one's garden, carried the weight of potential observation. For longtime residents, these were not trivial matters. They represented a breach of the social contract that had governed the neighborhood for decades. Yet, the social fabric of Montecito is complex, and interactions are rarely simple. For example, the couple's philanthropic and social activities added another layer of scrutiny. Meghan and Harry were not merely residents. They were public figures whose engagements and appearances drew media attention. Some neighbors were inspired by their involvement, seeing opportunities to support charitable causes and increase visibility. Others were wary, feeling that the global spotlight threatened to overshadow local norms and disrupt the carefully curated equilibrium of the community. Tensions were exacerbated by the interplay of celebrity culture and traditional neighborhood etiquette. Montecito operates on subtle signals. Who is invited to which event, how gestures of courtesy are exchanged, and how disputes are managed discreetly. In such a context, the introduction of global figures can feel overwhelming. Some residents reportedly attempted to reach out diplomatically, hoping to integrate Meghan and Harry into the social rhythm. Others, however, opted for silence or avoidance, wary that any interaction might be scrutinized by the media or misinterpreted by neighbors. This mix of engagement and caution created a volatile environment, where misunderstandings and rumors could easily take root. The media's role cannot be overstated. Every minor social misstep, every new construction or renovation project, every movement within the estate was analyzed and broadcast globally. Neighbors found themselves navigating a delicate balance. They wanted privacy, but also needed to manage perceptions, both locally and internationally. The very act of living next to celebrities required a heightened level of vigilance. Some residents described feeling like actors in a theater of observation, where every glance and gesture was potentially a headline. Rob Lowe's observations highlighted another crucial element: the cultural collision between Hollywood and royalty. Hollywood thrives on visibility, media engagement, and strategic self-presentation. Royal life, while public in certain contexts, often emphasizes protocol, discretion, and image control. When Meghan and Harry entered Montecito, these two cultures met in intimate proximity. Residents accustomed to Hollywood norms found themselves negotiating with individuals who had been trained to navigate the complexities of royal life, creating moments of tension, misunderstanding, and fascination. Within this landscape, community disputes began to surface. Some were minor. A noise complaint here, a security concern there, but each incident was amplified by the couple's presence. What might have been a routine matter in a less famous neighborhood became a point of contention, discussion, and speculation. The involvement of drones, as well as alleged confrontations between Meghan and neighbors, added layers of complexity. Reports of bullying or assertive behavior, whether accurate or exaggerated, began circulating, further inflaming social dynamics. The stakes were high because Montecito is not just a neighborhood, it's a social ecosystem. Influence, reputation, and connections matter. The presence of high-profile residents changes calculations for everyone. Alliances shift, perceptions evolve, and social capital becomes more valuable than ever. For long-time residents, navigating this environment required both diplomacy and caution. Every encounter with Meghan and Harry had to be weighed for potential impact on social standing, privacy, and the broader perception of the community. Interestingly, this dynamic also created a narrative tension that the media eagerly amplified. Headlines emphasized conflict, exaggerating minor incidents into sweeping tales of drama and disruption. Neighbors, already wary of attention, found themselves caught between maintaining personal privacy and managing public perception. Rumors about drone surveillance, confrontations, and neighborhood politics circulated freely, creating an environment of speculation and anxiety. Amid all this, some residents sought to humanize the situation. They emphasized that Meghan and Harry were also adjusting to a new environment, managing immense media scrutiny, and attempting to create a private sanctuary. They argued that misunderstandings were inevitable and that the tensions could be resolved with patience and communication. Yet, the combination of drones, rumors, and social tension made resolution difficult. Small incidents were magnified, minor disputes were interpreted as aggressive behavior, and the narrative of conflict grew. At the heart of this chapter in Montecito's history is a simple truth. Living next to celebrities, even the most charming and media-savvy, is not always glamorous. The same qualities that make individuals fascinating to the public can create friction in a community where discretion is paramount. The arrival of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry illuminated the fragility of social dynamics in elite neighborhoods, revealing how fame, perception, and technology intersect in ways that can quickly escalate tension. As Montecito adjusted to its new reality, residents found themselves balancing admiration and wariness, curiosity and caution. Drones became symbols of intrusion, encounters became stories of negotiation, and every social gesture carried potential consequences. The quiet harmony that had defined the community for decades was disrupted, replaced by a complex web of intrigue, observation, and speculation. And yet, even as tensions simmered, the most dramatic chapter was still ahead. Allegations would surface, narratives would clash, and what began as a simple adjustment to new neighbors would escalate into a story of eviction, surveillance, and conflict that captured international attention. Drones. Small, mechanical, unassuming. Yet in Montecito, they became the catalyst for one of the most talked-about controversies in the neighborhood's history. Imagine sitting in your sunlit garden, the ocean breeze brushing your face, when a small whirring sound pierces the calm. At first, it seems harmless, a hobbyist with a new gadget. But then it happens again, and again. Suddenly, the serenity of Montecito is pierced by a technology that is innocuous in most contexts, yet here, in the hands of, or in the vicinity of, one of the world's most scrutinized couples, drones became a lightning rod for suspicion, fear, and speculation. Reports from neighbors painted an increasingly tense picture. Some claimed the drones hovered close to property lines, seemingly observing homes, gardens, and private gatherings. Others suggested they were harmless, capturing the sweeping beauty of the estates and the coastline, perhaps part of a security system. But the sheer frequency of sightings, coupled with Meghan and Harry's high-profile status, created a perception that the technology was being used deliberately to monitor, intimidate, or disrupt. Rob Lowe reportedly voiced concerns, suggesting that the persistent drone activity was unsettling and unprecedented for a community that prized discretion. "We've dealt with paparazzi before," one longtime resident said, "but this felt different. It was subtle, quiet, and somehow invasive." What makes drones so controversial in Montecito is not their function, but what they symbolize. In a neighborhood where privacy is a commodity, drones become mechanical spies, extensions of power and influence, whether intended or not. Residents began speculating. Were these devices part of Meghan's security protocol? Was someone attempting to monitor the neighborhood under the guise of aerial photography? Or were they an innocent hobbyist's toy being misinterpreted due to heightened awareness? The ambiguity fueled anxiety, and ambiguity is fertile ground for rumors. Neighbors described moments of unease that verged on paranoia. A gardener walking to the gate would notice a drone circling overhead. A dog walker would feel eyes, or the mechanical equivalent, tracking their movements. Each sighting became a story, passed from one neighbor to another, embroidered with fear, speculation, and anticipation. The narrative grew, fueled by the notion that something unusual was happening, something that disrupted the carefully maintained social order of Montecito. Rob Lowe's involvement amplified the issue. As a respected actor with decades in Hollywood and deep roots in Montecito, his perspective carried weight. Reports suggest that Lowe described the drone activity as more than mere coincidence, interpreting the presence of drones in a neighborhood of elite privacy as potentially aggressive or intrusive. When someone of his stature voices concern, it validates suspicions that might otherwise have been dismissed. Suddenly, a mechanical curiosity became a symbol of tension, a focal point for larger anxieties about control, privacy, and influence. The neighbors themselves were divided. Some insisted the drones were harmless, arguing that their presence had no malicious intent. After all, Montecito is a community of high-net-worth individuals, many of whom use advanced security systems, cameras, and other technology to monitor their properties. The couple's estate, grand and fortified, might naturally warrant aerial surveillance or hobbyist photography to maintain its sprawling grounds. Yet others saw patterns, repeated flights at unusual hours, hovering near neighboring properties, and rapid responses whenever someone approached the drone. Whether factual or perceived, these patterns contributed to a growing sense of unease. Adding fuel to the fire were rumors about Meghan's behavior in response to the drones. Some residents alleged that she personally monitored activity, expressed concern to staff about neighbors, or otherwise indicated an awareness of surveillance beyond standard security. The narrative that emerged in media coverage was one of a woman asserting control, aggressively protecting her privacy, while simultaneously raising questions about the privacy of those around her. It was, according to some neighbors, a collision of rights and expectations. Her right to safety and discretion versus their right to tranquility and autonomy. The debate escalated quickly. Social media posts, local gossip, and national headlines began framing the story as a clash between celebrity entitlement and neighborhood norms. Drones, in this context, became more than tools. They were symbols. To some, they represented intrusion, surveillance, and intimidation. To others, they were merely technology misinterpreted through the lens of fame and suspicion. The ambiguity created a perfect storm. Fear and fascination intertwined, feeding one another until the story became impossible to ignore. What makes this incident particularly striking is the intersection of technology and human perception. A drone is inherently neutral. It cannot intend malice. Yet when placed in a charged social environment, with individuals whose every action is scrutinized and interpreted, neutral technology takes on symbolic meaning. Each buzz overhead was no longer just a mechanical hum. It became a statement, a question, an accusation in the minds of residents. The escalation continued as anecdotes proliferated. Stories circulated about drones flying near windows, capturing images of gardens, and hovering during private events. Some neighbors recounted confrontations. Curious residents attempting to locate the operator, staff members expressing frustration, and brief exchanges that seemed polite on the surface but carried underlying tension. The narrative solidified. Drones were central to the emerging drama, and no one could ignore their presence. Media coverage soon magnified these tensions, framing the drone activity as emblematic of Meghan Markle's broader impact on the community. Headlines implied surveillance, social manipulation, and disruption, often blurring the lines between fact and speculation. For Montecito residents, this coverage added another layer of complexity. Their private concerns were now public fodder, subject to debate, judgment, and ridicule on a global scale. This exposure compounded the stress and anxiety generated by the drones themselves, creating an environment of perpetual scrutiny and speculation. Yet the story does not end with technology alone. Underlying the drone incidents were deeper questions about boundaries, power, and social norms. Montecito, for all its beauty, operates on unspoken codes of behavior. Residents are expected to respect one another's space, to maintain discretion, and to navigate disputes quietly and diplomatically. The drones, combined with alleged confrontations and perceptions of assertive behavior, challenged these norms. What might have been resolved with a casual conversation instead became the foundation for a broader narrative of tension and distrust. Rob Lowe's statements emphasized the stakes. His observations suggested that the drones were not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that reflected the broader challenges of integrating high-profile individuals into a tight-knit community. The concern was not simply about machines in the sky. It was about the emotional, social, and psychological impact on neighbors, the disruption of norms, and the sense that private spaces were no longer sacrosanct. This chapter in Montecito's history highlights a broader truth about celebrity life. Even seemingly minor incidents can have disproportionate effects when fame, technology, and community collide. A drone, insignificant in most contexts, becomes a symbol of power, influence, and potential overreach when hovering over the properties of high-profile individuals. Perception becomes reality, and a quiet coastal neighborhood transforms into a stage for drama, speculation, and fear. And yet, the drone incidents were only the beginning. They set the stage for allegations of bullying, rumors of eviction, and claims that would soon draw international attention. What started as a question of surveillance or safety evolved into a complex narrative about control, privacy, and the social fabric of one of the world's most exclusive neighborhoods. The moment Rob Lowe decided to speak publicly about the tensions in Montecito marked a turning point. For years, he had been a fixture in the community, a Hollywood veteran whose reputation balanced charm with gravitas. Residents respected him, media outlets listened when he spoke, and his words carried weight. But when he addressed the mounting concerns surrounding Meghan Markle's presence, the quiet undercurrents of neighborly discomfort became headlines. Headlines became narratives, and narratives became a story the world couldn't ignore. Rob Lowe's first statements were carefully measured. He didn't want to attack anyone personally, but he couldn't ignore what he had observed. According to multiple accounts, he described the scenario as unusual for a neighborhood accustomed to discretion. "We've all lived here for decades, navigating privacy with respect and subtlety," he reportedly said. "Suddenly, there's a level of visibility and tension that we simply haven't experienced before." Those words carried an implied warning. Even for residents who prided themselves on tolerance and diplomacy, the situation was exceptional, bordering on extraordinary. His comments didn't come out of thin air. Lowe had witnessed drone activity near neighboring properties, interactions between staff and residents that raised eyebrows, and small but repeated breaches of expected norms. Each incident on its own might have been manageable. Taken together, however, they painted a picture of a neighborhood under pressure, a community struggling to reconcile the presence of world-class celebrities with long-established expectations of discretion. The media latched onto Rob Lowe's statements immediately. In interviews, articles, and televised segments, his observations were framed as confirmation of rumors that had circulated privately for months. Suddenly, what was once behind-the-gate gossip was transformed into a story with international reach. Headlines claimed that Lowe described Meghan as aggressive or controlling, while others suggested his remarks were less about her personality and more about the impact her presence had on Montecito's social balance. Either way, the narrative was set. A respected Hollywood insider had effectively validated neighborhood concerns, giving them public credibility. But Lowe's voice was not just a vehicle for controversy. it was also a lens into the complexity of the situation. He emphasized that the issues were not personal attacks, but reflections on community dynamics. He highlighted the delicate balance of privacy, boundaries, and neighborly etiquette, pointing out that even minor deviations in behavior could cause ripple effects in a community built on subtle social codes. His statements drew attention not to scandals or gossip alone, but to the underlying psychology of Montecito, a neighborhood where perception mattered as much as reality, and where small actions could have oversized consequences. What made Lowe's involvement particularly compelling was the way it bridged Hollywood and real-life drama. As an insider of both celebrity culture and Montecito's social fabric, he had credibility on both sides. He could interpret the nuances of celebrity behavior that ordinary neighbors might misread, while also recognizing when those behaviors crossed boundaries and created unease. In this sense, he was both a witness and an interpreter, translating the quiet, often invisible tensions of Montecito into words that the public could understand and the media could amplify. Yet, even as Lowe's words gave voice to neighborhood concerns, they introduced new layers of complication. Residents who had previously remained private were suddenly forced to confront the possibility that their stories might be publicized. Some worried that any disagreement or complaint could be magnified, misrepresented, or sensationalized. Others felt validated. Finally, someone respected enough to speak out was acknowledging what they had privately experienced for months. The dynamic created a mixture of relief, fear, and anticipation, setting the stage for further escalation. What added intrigue to Lowe's statements was the timing. By the time he spoke publicly, the drone incidents had already generated speculation, minor confrontations had occurred, and social tensions were mounting. Lowe's comments transformed these scattered events into a coherent, albeit controversial, narrative. The combination of his credibility, the pre-existing tensions, and the media amplification meant that Montecito's private dramas were no longer contained. They were now part of a global conversation. Public reaction was immediate. Social media erupted with debate. Was Rob Lowe exaggerating? Was Meghan simply misunderstood? Were the neighbors overreacting? Every angle was dissected, discussed, and argued. The story quickly became polarizing, with people taking sides not just based on facts, but on perception, bias, and loyalty. The drama transcended Montecito, sparking discussions about privacy, celebrity entitlement, and the challenges of integrating high-profile individuals into small, tight-knit communities. But Lowe's involvement didn't just illuminate the conflicts, it also amplified emotional stakes. His statements highlighted the personal dimensions of the tensions: fear, frustration, discomfort, and even resentment among neighbors. They also brought into focus Meghan Markle's challenges, adjusting to a new environment, managing international scrutiny, and navigating community expectations that were both subtle and rigid. Through Lowe's perspective, viewers could see that the issue was not merely about celebrity behavior. It was about human dynamics, perception, and the clash between private desires and public reality. One of the most striking elements of Lowe's account was his emphasis on the symbolic weight of technology, particularly the drones. He reportedly suggested that even the appearance of surveillance could generate significant anxiety, regardless of intent. In a community like Montecito, perception often mattered more than reality. A neighbor who felt watched, even if no ill will existed, could interpret benign actions as intrusive. Lowe's framing turned drones from mere gadgets into narrative devices that embodied control, tension, and power dynamics. As the story developed, media outlets began referencing Lowe's statements as evidence that Meghan Markle's presence was contentious. Headlines implied conflict, confrontation, and even intimidation, framing the narrative in dramatic terms that appealed to a wide audience. While some readers understood the nuances, others interpreted the situation in black and white terms. Meghan as the disruptor, the neighborhood as the victim. The simplification fueled discussion, debate, and further speculation, creating a feedback loop in which perception increasingly overshadowed fact. Importantly, Lowe's commentary also raised questions about the broader implications of fame, privacy, and integration into established communities. How do high-profile individuals coexist with neighbors who expect discretion? How do long-term residents maintain their sense of autonomy when global attention intersects with local life? Lowe's voice highlighted these tensions without explicitly passing judgment, but the implications were clear. Montecito was grappling with challenges that extended far beyond celebrity gossip. Residents, for their part, reacted in different ways. Some quietly hoped the public scrutiny would fade, believing that tensions could be resolved privately. Others felt vindicated, seeing Lowe's statements as confirmation that their concerns were legitimate. Still others were anxious, fearing that the media spotlight would continue to escalate and that every misstep, real or imagined, would become a headline. The result was a neighborhood caught between relief, curiosity, and apprehension, struggling to navigate a rapidly evolving social landscape. But the implications went even further. Lowe's statements implicitly challenged assumptions about privilege, power, and entitlement. In a community accustomed to wealth and influence, the arrival of figures who combined celebrity with royalty introduced new hierarchies and expectations. What behaviors were acceptable? How should neighbors respond? And to what extent could long-standing norms accommodate unprecedented levels of fame and scrutiny? These questions, subtle yet potent, became central to the unfolding drama. Through it all, one thing was clear. Rob Lowe had transformed Montecito's private tensions into a story the public could grasp, framing drones, social friction, and neighborhood dynamics in a way that resonated globally. But his involvement also heightened stakes, intensified scrutiny, and set the stage for further controversy. Once his voice entered the narrative, there was no turning back. And yet, even with Lowe's perspective, the full story was far from complete. What neighbors had experienced, what the drones had symbolized, and what conflicts had emerged were only part of the picture. The next chapters would reveal allegations, confrontations, and a drama that escalated beyond simple neighborhood disputes, culminating in claims of eviction, intimidation, and behavior that would shock even seasoned Montecito residents. Montecito had always been a sanctuary for those seeking beauty, privacy, and quiet prestige. Its winding streets, hidden estates, and carefully manicured gardens gave residents a sense of control over their surroundings, a control that was both tangible and psychological. But when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry arrived, that equilibrium began to shift. Suddenly, long-standing assumptions about property, boundaries, and social etiquette were under scrutiny. What had once been an invisible social contract, rules followed quietly, disputes resolved discreetly, was now being tested against the weight of celebrity and royal privilege. From the beginning, the tension was palpable. Neighbors described a subtle but unmistakable shift in how interactions unfolded. Casual greetings became weighted encounters. Casual property inspections were approached with heightened awareness, and even the most mundane activities, morning walks, gardening, or children playing, were seen through the lens of heightened scrutiny. Residents began asking themselves questions they had never considered. Could a neighbor, no matter how charming, exert influence simply by virtue of fame? Were long-established norms flexible enough to accommodate individuals whose lives were governed by global attention? And most importantly, when privilege collided with privacy, who won? The drone incidents had already introduced unease, but this was just one aspect of a larger dynamic. Alleged confrontations over property boundaries, landscaping, and security measures began surfacing. Some neighbors claimed Meghan or her staff made pointed remarks about how nearby properties should be managed, while others alleged subtle assertions of control over shared spaces. It wasn't always overt. Often it was the impression, the insinuation, the sense that rules had changed without warning. This created a psychological tension, a feeling that one's autonomy as a resident was being encroached upon by a newcomer with extraordinary influence. Rob Lowe's perspective was particularly illuminating. According to sources, he framed the situation as less about personality and more about the challenge of integrating individuals with immense social power into a community that relied on subtle, negotiated authority. In Montecito, influence is normally earned over years, sometimes decades. It is maintained through quiet diplomacy, personal relationships, and a deep understanding of local norms. Fame, however, bypasses those mechanisms. Meghan and Harry entered with global recognition already secured. Their social power did not need validation, it simply existed. This upset the normal balance, creating friction with residents accustomed to a more gradual, relational form of influence. The friction manifested in multiple ways. Some neighbors expressed concern about drone activity, seeing it as an extension of the couple's authority, mechanical surveillance that implied control over shared spaces. Others were frustrated by the presence of staff enforcing boundaries or questioning practices that had long been accepted. Even minor infractions, overgrown hedges, exterior lighting, or noise from landscaping crews, were now scrutinized through the prism of royal privilege. What might have once been a simple adjustment now became a matter of negotiation, interpretation, and sometimes confrontation. Social gatherings, a cornerstone of Montecito life, were also affected. Invitations that had previously been extended freely became nuanced affairs. Some neighbors hesitated, worried that any perceived slight could be interpreted through the lens of celebrity entitlement. Others overcompensated, seeking approval or acknowledgement from the new residents. Every interaction carried layers of significance, making ordinary socialization a minefield of potential missteps. The psychological pressure of navigating these dynamics became an invisible but potent force in the community. The media's role cannot be overlooked. Reports and social media posts amplified perceptions of tension, often transforming small disagreements into narratives of conflict. Headlines implied bullying, intimidation, and disruption, even when incidents were minor or ambiguous. Residents found themselves negotiating not only with their high-profile neighbors, but also with the knowledge that their own behavior could be scrutinized publicly. This dual pressure, celebrity and media, magnified the stakes, making each encounter a delicate exercise in diplomacy. Underlying all of this was a question of fairness. Montecito's residents were accustomed to a social equilibrium where respect, discretion, and subtle negotiation governed interactions. They believed that everyone, regardless of fame, was expected to operate within these norms. Meghan and Harry's arrival challenged that assumption. Privilege, whether derived from celebrity, wealth, or royal lineage, introduced a new variable that complicated an already complex social ecosystem. Residents began asking themselves, does fame allow one to bypass established norms? Can long-standing conventions survive the intrusion of global influence? Some of the tension was rooted in perception rather than action. The very knowledge that Meghan and Harry were watching, or that their staff was attentive to neighborhood activities, was enough to create unease. In Montecito, perception often carries as much weight as reality. The symbolic power of the couple, former royals, media icons, global influencers, magnified minor incidents into major points of discussion. Every glance, every comment, every drone sighting was filtered through the lens of privilege, transforming ordinary interactions into charged encounters. Yet there were also real points of conflict. Disputes over property lines, landscaping, and drone activity created tangible friction. Residents reportedly attempted to address these issues privately, hoping for resolution without public attention. Some alleged that attempts at negotiation were met with resistance or assertive behavior from staff or the couple's representatives. Whether intentional or misinterpreted, these incidents reinforced the perception that privilege could override established norms, creating a growing sense of tension. Rob Lowe's commentary emphasized that the situation was not simply about personal grievances. It reflected a deeper challenge of social integration. How does a community rooted in tradition and discretion accommodate individuals whose lives operate on an entirely different scale? How do neighbors maintain authority and autonomy when faced with individuals who wield global recognition and influence? These questions were not abstract. They were lived experiences for residents navigating the delicate balance between respect, privacy, and accommodation. The tension reached a crescendo as rumors began circulating about potential eviction. While nothing had been confirmed officially at this point, whispers suggested that neighbors were considering whether the disruption caused by perceived intrusions warranted stronger action. Conversations about property rights, community authority, and the limits of privilege became more frequent. The sense of unease that began with drones and minor disputes now extended to fundamental questions of governance and community control. Emotional stakes were high. Longtime residents felt their sense of ownership and security challenged. Newcomers, aware of the scrutiny, were navigating a labyrinth of expectations while attempting to maintain privacy. Every encounter carried potential consequences for reputation, relationships, and social standing. The psychological intensity of living next to royalty, compounded by the pressures of media scrutiny, created an environment ripe for misunderstanding, rumor, and conflict. Yet, even amid tension, there were moments of charm, civility, and attempt at integration. Some neighbors found opportunities for connection, brief interactions that were polite and cordial. These moments, however, were fragile, easily overshadowed by the cumulative weight of scrutiny, rumor, and expectation. The neighborhood's social ecosystem was at a tipping point. One misstep, one perceived slight, one additional drone flight could amplify the narrative, drawing private concerns into the public eye. This chapter in Montecito's history highlights the collision of two worlds, a neighborhood built on discretion, etiquette, and subtle negotiation, and a couple whose fame, influence, and royal background introduced new norms and expectations. The tensions were not merely personal. They were emblematic of a larger clash between privilege and community authority. Residents struggled to navigate boundaries, enforce norms, and reconcile admiration with apprehension. And as these tensions simmered, the story was only beginning to escalate. The combination of drones, perceived assertiveness, and media amplification set the stage for dramatic confrontations, allegations of bullying, and rumors that would capture international attention. By the time the first rumors of eviction began circulating, Montecito had transformed from a quiet enclave into a neighborhood on edge. The idyllic streets, lined with flowering bougainvillea and stately gates, were no longer just scenic. They had become the backdrop for one of the most sensational stories of celebrity conflict in recent memory. It started as whispers, neighbors speculating in hushed tones, casual comments at garden parties. But the buzz quickly intensified, fueled by the media and amplified by social media speculation. The rumors centered on an allegation that Meghan Markle's presence, combined with perceived assertive behavior and ongoing drone activity, had created tension severe enough that some residents were considering measures to protect the community's equilibrium, including the possibility of eviction. To those unfamiliar with Montecito, eviction might sound extreme. After all, this is a community where wealth and discretion usually afford a buffer against confrontation. But here, the story took on layers of complexity that went beyond simple property disputes. For years, Montecito operated on an unspoken social contract: respect boundaries, maintain discretion, and honor the shared values of the community. But when the narrative shifted to include global fame and royal privilege, this contract was suddenly under strain. Alleged incidents, real or perceived, were scrutinized through the lens of influence. A drone hovering over a property, an assertive comment from a neighbor, or an interaction with staff could be interpreted as a breach of protocol. Multiply these moments across a high-profile estate, and tension magnifies exponentially. Rob Lowe's prior statements had already given credibility to the community's unease. Residents began to feel validated but also alarmed. If someone like Lowe, with decades of experience in Hollywood and deep roots in Montecito, observed that the situation was unusual and potentially disruptive, it lent authority to speculation that Meghan's presence had gone beyond mere neighborhood adjustment. The perception that a resident, any resident, might be contributing to a level of tension warranting eviction became more plausible, at least in rumor. As the story spread, social media became a pressure cooker. Platforms were flooded with commentary. Some users defended Meghan, arguing that fame and security concerns justify extra measures. Others criticized her, painting her as a disruptor who overstepped the boundaries of civility. The debate was polarized, with little room for nuance. Inside Montecito, residents were caught in the middle. Some worried that public speculation would exacerbate conflicts and potentially harm their property values or reputations. Others found themselves inadvertently dragged into the narrative simply by proximity. The rumors themselves took on a life of their own. Some neighbors were said to be quietly discussing legal mechanisms, community boards, and covenant clauses that might allow them to contest behaviors perceived as disruptive. Others were simply expressing frustration, feeling that even without formal action, the tension had altered the neighborhood's atmosphere. These discussions were discreet, but word travels fast in a small, tight-knit community, particularly when the media is paying attention. Eviction, of course, is not a simple or casual process. Montecito's estates are heavily protected, with legal safeguards that make involuntary removal extraordinarily difficult. Yet the rumors had symbolic weight. They represented the community's collective anxiety, the sense that normal mechanisms of neighborhood diplomacy might not be sufficient to manage the complexities introduced by high-profile residents. Even if the legal threat was minimal, the mere suggestion that eviction was being considered heightened the tension. Residents now had a tangible, if improbable, symbol of conflict to rally around or to worry about. The emotional dimension was equally significant. For longtime residents, the idea that a neighbor could, by virtue of fame and assertiveness, destabilize decades of social equilibrium was alarming. Pride, territoriality, and a sense of justice were all engaged. Conversations at neighborhood gatherings reportedly became charged, with some residents expressing outright frustration while others tried to mediate or maintain civility. Even casual interactions, walking a dog, greeting someone in the street, carried a subtle, unspoken weight.